Mormon Mental Health Podcast is a production of the Open Stories Foundation and relies on donations from its listeners like you. To help keep this podcast alive, please consider becoming a monthly subscriber. Any amount will make a difference. You can click the right-hand donate button on MormonMentalHealth.org. All contributions are tax-deductible within the United States and go towards podcast production and building community support and program development for Mormons on various paths and journeys. Thank you for listening.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Mormon Mental Health. This is Natasha Parker, and I am here for another episode of Mormon Mental Health Podcast. I'm so glad to have you all with me tonight. I hope you're all doing well. I know that we're in the middle of COVID-19 kind of self-quarantine times. So I hope that whatever that means for you, that finds you healthy and hopefully, you know, enjoying your time in your home and with your family and your loved ones, and hope that you're doing okay. So tonight I'm super excited to have Allan and Kattie Mount. I've actually been wanting to have them on my podcast for a long time. They are the founders of the Marriage on a Tightrope podcast, and so I'm super excited to interview them tonight. Before I go into introducing them, I just want to remind all of you who are Mormon Mental Health podcast listeners that this podcast cannot survive without your financial support. So we always give a little plug for, we've got a few dollars to throw our way. Believe it or not, it doesn't take much if a lot of people do it to make this a financially sustainable podcast. And it's always struggled to be one. It kind of barely ekes out every year. We need about $5,000 per year to make it what would be considered financially sustainable, meaning it covers all of its own costs. That doesn't really even include having hosts or producers or things necessarily paid for the work that they do. Most of us do this volunteer-wise. But as far as like website, platform costs, I do try to give some type of stipends to those who guest host for me, etc. So there's people who edit and all that. So there's a lot of actual costs that go into this. And we love offering it to you. I love having it as a pet project. And I think it has a lot of good people on it, a lot of good resources, a lot of good information. So please, if you find value in this podcast, please donate to it. You can do that at MormonMentalHealth.org. There's some very easy donate buttons where you can do a one-time donation or even become kind of like a subscriber and throw a few bucks this way every month or so. So if you can't, for whatever reason, financially donate, there's lots of other ways to support us. You can like our Facebook page. You can share a podcast that you feel like would be helpful to family or friends. You can let other people know about it. You can comment. You can give me feedback or ideas. You can give a review on Facebook about Mormon Mental Health, or even on Amazon iTunes. So all of those things help us do better as a podcast, and we always appreciate your support and help. So thanks for that. So let's move on to the exciting part, which is Allan and Kattie. Hi, guys. I'm so glad to have you here.
We're excited to be here.
Thanks for having us.
How have I not had you on before? This is crazy.
I know. It seems like we talk and do things together quite often. So when it was finally like, hey, would you want to come on the show? We're like, well, haven't we already been on the show? So we're very, very excited to be here.
All right. So you two are the founders of Marriage on a Tightrope. So for anybody who would not know what that means, let's start there. What is this podcast that you guys started and why?
Well, Kattie has been an acrobat in the circus for about 25 years.
This meaning your marriage?
Marriage on a tightrope, just playing with the word. Well, Kattie, it was your idea. Why don't you tell a little bit about where that idea came from?
Right. So Allan had a faith transition in 2017. And when we were going through this faith transition, the show, The Greatest Showman, came out. And we were listening to the music and loving the music. And the song, Tightrope with You, what's the official?
It's just called Tightrope.
Yeah, Tightrope. Anyway, that song came on, and I sent it to Alan at work, and I said, this is what I feel like my marriage is I'm walking this tightrope, and I'm trying to stay positive, but I'm afraid of what's to come and the unknown. And so it was just right after that we started the podcast, and we decided that the most fitting thing or theme of it would be marriage on a tightrope. So that's kind of how we came up with the name of us.
Yeah, so that started in January 2018, and we're still going strong today, a little over, it's like about 27 months later, it looks like. And we've done 67 or so episodes, so it's not quite weekly, but it's just about averaging every other week at this point.
And where were you at in the faith transition process of Alan's when you started the podcast?
Yeah, so Alan, he told me in like 2017. That's when I realized that.
Probably March is when I, maybe a little later than that, May or June, it's when I kind of said, I think I know where I'm at.
Right. And so it was a really dark time. There weren't a lot of resources. I didn't feel like I had a lot of support. And one of the main things that happened is I went and talked to a member of the stake presidency. And I asked him, is there anyone that I can talk to? Because I don't know how to navigate this. And I just need like a roadmap, or I don't know anyone in this situation. And so you don't have to give me a name right now, but if you could think of someone and maybe approach them, that would be really helpful to me. And he sat back and he thought for a few minutes, and then he said, no, there really isn't anyone you can talk to. And that really upset me. And it made me feel like there has to be other people in this situation, and there have to be people who are just like scared and alone, kind of like how I felt. And so it was like in January, Alan knew how to record podcasts. And so I just said, hey, what if we recorded our own podcast? And so he jumped at that chance, and we recorded our first episode and sent it to Bill Real on Mormon Discussions. And we didn't hear any feedback back. And so we just thought, well, that's it. And then it was a Saturday night towards the end of January. And he sent us a text and he said, I'm releasing your episode tomorrow. And we were like, we didn't have time to back out of it, I guess. We were really worried, but it was really just surprising and reaffirming when after that first episode aired, we received a ton of feedback. And then we realized, okay, we're on the right track here. We're not the only ones in this boat.
So by the time we recorded the first episode, right, we had already made that decision that this wasn't going to tear us apart. We had chosen to stay together. Not that it was really a question in 2017, but 2017 was definitely the hard year. But by the time we hit record on the first episode, it was definitely, we can do something to try to find other people in the same situation and help other people in the same situation, because we learned a lot of lessons by the time we hit record. So that's kind of where we were at. While I did not believe the same way I used to come the first episode, I was still fully active and trying to remain fully active when we initially started in 2018.
Okay. So it wasn't like you had it all figured out, but you had, at least it sounds like, come to some conclusions or some directions that you wanted to make sure you were headed down the path of choosing your family, choosing your marriage, not allowing a faith transition to, quote unquote, I guess, break you in that way.
Sure.
And then you didn't feel like there was a lot of support or resources. So was this a little bit, in some ways, just kind of like, on the one hand, maybe seeing what other people had to say, but maybe helping you navigate it along the way? Like, maybe if we podcast about it, we get other people's comments, we can get maybe some help ourselves from other people's perspectives? Or do you feel like podcasting helped you process?
Yeah, I don't know if that was a conscious thought or not. It absolutely ended up happening.
Yeah, we were able to process a lot. I mean, right, you have like these really hard conversations, and they're, especially at the beginning, they're constant, and it's hard and you're trying to figure things out. And I think that was an unforeseen a blessing, you could say, or byproduct of this, is that we were able to connect with people in our situation. And I mean, really, it was super helpful for us just to process it. It was hard. It's always hard to put yourself out there.
Did you feel like you did get support, or did you feel like you got backlash, or people who were snarky or upset with the two of you for whatever reasons? Or was it mainly like a pretty fairly supportive?
It was overwhelmingly positive. There were a few instances of a couple family members I would probably say not understanding why we needed to do this. And that's understandable. To be fair to them, we had just told them where I was. They had no idea. We had just told them the week prior to the first episode coming out. So when the first episode came out, we called family and said, this is something you're going to see. I met with my bishop as well and subscribed him to Bill Reel's Mormon Discussions feed, which was kind of fun. And said, look, I didn't know that we could do just our feed. So anyway, I said, ignore Radio Free Mormon, ignore this other one, but we're this one. And you can listen to that if you want to hear what we're saying. Didn't get any pushback from anyone in the church at all. But a few family members didn't quite understand and were a little nervous that we would talk about them. And we're very clear from the very beginning that we won't do that. We're not going to call out family members on our podcast.
Yeah. And I think that once they did listen, it was a non-issue.
Right.
So if anything, I would feel like overwhelmingly it was supportive.
Yeah. Okay. And do you feel, would it be okay if the two of you backed up a minute and told us a little bit about kind of your Mormon story? Where do you come from? Prior to this 2017 kind of moment that you're talking about, what kind of Mormon family were you? What kind of Mormon marriage were you? What kind of upbringings did you have, et cetera?
Yeah. Do you want to go?
Sure. So I grew up in a super Orthodox home. We wore church clothes all day on Sunday. We would go to church if we were in another state. We would always stop for church on vacation. We weren't allowed to swim on Sundays. I mean, you think about this pretty Orthodox families, and I would say that would be mine. I'm the oldest of 8. I come from a Polynesian background. So my dad is Tongan and my mom is white. And because of that, everything is very centered around spirituality. Polynesian people are just very spiritual people. And then on my mother's side, it's the pioneer stock. And so I think I got a double whammy on both sides, right? A 2-punch. Anyway, but I would say that I'm a person that likes rules. I'm the oldest. I'm a red personality, but I like to know where the boundaries are. And I was a really very obedient kid. I did all the right things, right? I mean, I never fought. I loved young women's. I'm a very social person. So to me, the church world was my social playground, right? I always had friends and I had lots of other people who supported me. So that was really great. I loved that about it. When I was 12, I had a sister who died when she was a baby. She was only 3 months old. And so I think for me, that was kind of my cement block of eternal families and seeing my sister again. And so that has definitely shaped the type of Mormonism that I practice or that I believe. The way I believe is I think from that experience. And so anyway, I went to college and went on a mission, and I served in Barcelona, Spain, and that's where I met him. And I'll let him tell that story. And then I got home, and a year later we got married. So it was pretty quick. I think we knew that we got along pretty well. Do you want to tell your side?
Well, any questions for?
No, that's great. I usually, my measurement for measuring orthodoxy is Sunday dress, and Coca-Cola products.
Yep, no caffeinated beverages at my home.
Right. That tells me a lot about what kind of Mormon family.
And look what look where I am now. How far I've fallen from the tree.
I'm wearing off on her.
I know, yeah. As has BYU, by the way.
That's a good point.
That's true.
Oh, fun. Okay, so I'm the youngest of 6 children, grew up in Santa Barbara, California, Goleta, to be specific. That neighbors Isla Vista, which is the college town that UC Santa Barbara houses, other way around. And, we immediately got out of our church clothes on Sunday. That was a directive from our mom because she did not want us to ruin the church clothes and have to buy new church clothes.
Right.
I think that's been the direction we've taken our kids is after church, get out of them. We do not want to have to wash them. You wear them for 3 hours, now only 2. We can stretch it even further now without having to wash your clothes.
Right.
So yeah, I grew up as the youngest. I grew up with my oldest brother went on a mission when I was 8. And by the time I was graduated high school, I had another brother and a sister that went and served missions. All my siblings got married in the temple. In fact, the interesting part I think about my story, other than not growing up in Utah, is that all of my siblings married someone that was a convert to the church up until my closest brother after my mission, or right before my mission, he got married. So I grew up all my youth thinking, especially since there weren't very many LDS girls in my high school, I'm gonna baptize my wife. Like, that's just how it's gonna happen. And I just had that thought that I was going to convert my wife. I had a few girlfriends in high school a few relationships that ended because they weren't interested. And not that I dated them to convert them, but the closer that we got, I'm thinking of one specific relationship, and I've never gotten into this in a podcast this detailed. So I'm looking at Katie like, are we good?
This is so cool. I love getting new information.
I think after 15 years, I don't think you're threatened by some of those. But this one specific girl, we were together for a while, and she was Jewish. And so we started talking about Christ one night, and she looked at me and said, I can't believe you think he died for you. And as a Christian boy, I was devastated. It was like, I can't do this. I broke up with her that night, and it destroyed me. I was so upset about it. Anyway, so that's just one little side story about.
Well, and that's fairly typical story, right? Like prior to marriage, people are looking for, in Mormonism anyway, it seems to be pretty important to marry somebody with similar beliefs, right? And similar background. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wasn't going to get married outside of the Los Angeles temple. That's where my parents got married. That's where 5 of my 6, well, I'm the 6th, 5 of the siblings got married. We got married in the Salt Lake temple. She won on that one.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, during my youth, I was and even going up until I kind of stepped away from the church, I was everything that is a prototypical male in the church. I was white. I was outgoing and at least tried to be charismatic. I wasn't afraid to speak in front of people. I would volunteer as a youth to speak in church and sacrament meeting. I wasn't afraid of it. I really liked it. I thrived on it. And that did me well in the church. On the mission, Kate, we met. Oh, this is worth noting. And I'm comfortable answering any questions, but just for brevity, I'll brush past it, and you can dig deeper if you'd like, Natasha. But I had my mission call delayed after I had received my call to Barcelona, Spain. I went into the bishop's and stake president's office to confess a few things, and was told, you need to resubmit your papers after the repentance process. I did. I got the same mission call, Barcelona, Spain, just later on, and May 8th, 2002 was my new report date. And when I reported, that's the day that I met Katie. So if you ever are told that sinning doesn't bring blessings, I tease.
Well, in mental health, we're always trying to use positive reframes, right? So there you go. There you go, Alan.
There you have it. Yeah. So mission was great. Loved it. To this day, I'm grateful that I don't look back with regret on my mission. I look back at it with a lot of good memories and nostalgia. I can still look at mission, albums and feel nothing but positivity. I loved my mission, loved it. And we grew close on the mission from a friendship perspective, got to know each other a little bit without any prospect of romanticism, and which was great for our relationship. And then at the end of the mission, it happened quick. I mean, you heard it only took a year for her to get home. Well, she got home 6 months early, so earlier than me, rather. So when I got home, within 6 weeks, we had talked about getting married, and within another 2 or 3 weeks after that, we were engaged. So it was pretty quick.
And
so that gets us together. Yeah.
Yeah. And I will say, it sounds like you did come, even though you're both Mormon, you did come from a little different Mormonism, right? Like
Sure.
One of you seems like, you had a more Orthodox, devout type of upbringing than maybe the other one. And so even way before your faith transition, quote unquote, did you have Mormon issues come up between the two of you as far as just how you're going to run a family house and the expectations? Or there's plenty of Mormon ways people struggle. I say every Mormon marriage is a mixed faith marriage. It just depends I guess it just depends the severity of it.
Yeah. We have one good example, and then Katie, you'll tell that one. Tell the good example, and then I'll tell a little kind of personality-wise the differences there as well. So
yeah. So the best example I can give is Alan. It was like one of our first Sundays home together. And usually we would go to like my parents' house for dinner, or we would get together with his brother and sister-in-law. But this one particular Sunday, we were home by ourselves, and Alan sat down on the couch and turned on the Laker game.
Yeah.
And I was like, "What are you doing?" And he's
right.
I'm watching the Lakers. And I said, "We do not watch sports on Sunday. That's not something that we do." And he said, "Okay, well, what are we going to do?" And I said, "Let's watch a movie." And then he said, "Oh no, I don't watch movies on Sunday."
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. And I love it. I love the we, right? The we don't.
We. and so that was just like such a small thing, but it wasn't something we had ever talked about. And so then it was like, well, what are we going to do? Do we watch sports? Do we watch movies? What do we do? And then we
just started watching both.
We just watched both. and then the other thing that I thought was funny is Alan was playing like intramural sports, like church sports, right?
Oh yeah, this was
and he's like, "I'm gonna go to my game," and I'm like, "Okay, cool, see ya." And he came home, and after the game, he told me, I'm really sad you didn't come. And I'm like, "To a church sport activity?" And he goes, "Yeah, like my mom and dad came to all of my basketball church ball games and all of our stuff." And I'm
Sports
like,
"Oh, wow."
And I was like, no, unless it's like, high school sports. Like my parents never came to my like church basketball games. Like you just went and played, showed up and played, and then went home.
I mean, my dad was the guy that literally took shingles from our roof to go to volleyball games. And whenever you got a block, he passed out shingles to the crowd, and he would lead the entire crowd in whacking the shingles against the floor and saying roof, because that's a roof in volleyball is blocking someone. Like that's the family I came from. So sports were how you showed people you loved them. And so when she didn't come, I was devastated. Like, you didn't come to my church ball game?
And I was like, it's a church game. Like, that doesn't count.
So you guys were having major faith issues way before 27.
Yeah, and I don't know if we recognize them as being they weren't a big problem.
That just is like probably the thing that stood out the most, right? These little things that come up when you're first married and you like, what do we do?
I think marriage-wise, completely independent of religion, the biggest struggle we likely had was the personality differences. Katie we have a podcast, but Katie doesn't like the light to be shown on her. Mm-hmm. She doesn't need the attention or even want the attention or accolades. Mm-hmm. And I am the opposite. especially at the beginning, I didn't know how to turn that off. And sometimes I still catch myself, but I think you may have been surprised to find yourself married to someone that is always on. And the more eyes on him, the louder he is, and the closer to the line of appropriate vocabulary he is going to get. And always wanted to be the center of attention, the life of the party. And it was kind of like this. I just thinking about it now, I don't remember the last time you've given me that look of you need to be quiet. But I remember that look a lot early on. And I think for the better, it taught me to just calm down a bit, and taught her that it's okay to be open and communicate. And that's been beneficial, right? Is that a good way to put it?
It definitely has its place, right? Like that's why marriages work. Usually you have a yin and a yang. So
yeah.
I
love
yang?
that.
Is that what
I love that. So moving on then to faith transition time, it seems to me like, and I'm going to sweep with wide brushes here, but it seems to me like faith transitions go down in one of two ways. One is the one person kind of, as they come along issues or have problems with the church or come across information, they're right away talking to their spouse about it, right? And so all along the way, there's conversation or angst or issues or disagreements or agreements on a lot of these types of things. The second way I see that it typically goes down is that one person starts maybe finding a few things that kind of seem a little off kilter, but they're not big enough things to make anything come crashing down right away, but they're enough to kind of just put a little question mark. And so then but then they're worried and afraid and not sure what to make of it themselves. So they keep it private for a while, and then they dig deeper and they're assuming that everything's going to be fine and they're going to figure out the answers, and no need to worry a spouse about this, right? Because I'm not that worried about it yet. And then by the time they get a few weeks or even months down the road, now they're like, whoa, I'm in a really different position than I was. And my spouse really is kind of clueless, that I even started this kind of questioning journey to begin with. So first of all, I guess, do you agree with me that that's kind of a typical generality of how it can go? And then which one do you fit?
Yeah, I would probably say that. I think that maybe there would be a third group that has always kind of had some underlying issues with the church or hasn't always fit in with the church. And then it comes to a boiling point after they've been married, and whether they were open about that or not is a separate question. That does not describe me, but I do know some people that have never quite felt like they belonged at the church. And it isn't until well into marriage that they actually do something about it or start to talk about it. And maybe that fits in category 2 that you're describing. I think for us, where would we fit? In the first or the second group?
No, the second group.
So I think it's a little, just the brief little 2014, I was, title drop, Elders Quorum president, studying I was preparing a lesson for Elders Quorum and stumbled upon the essays. Read 2 of the essays, my mouth dropped. I go out to Katie and I say, did you know X, Y, and Z? And that the following conversation.
I had just had a baby.
Here's the caveat.
This is the caveat.
Disclaimer.
I had a brand new baby on my lap that I was nursing at the time. And so I have no recollection of this.
Yeah. I mean, the conversation that followed was panic, right? It was, this relationship will not last if you leave the church. And I was just like, whoa, I'm just telling you about some stuff I read on the church website. So I put it all away. I put it up on the shelf and kept going on with my life.
And there were some other things happening. Like Alan's dad had died. He had been killed by a drunk driver that
just about
year.
6 months before that.
And so that was like a really, really, really difficult thing that we were dealing with too. And so, I mean, some of Alan's feelings, they're all kind of intertwined, right? Because we're going through this really difficult thing. And then, he finds stuff about the church, and anyway.
Yeah. So that was tough. It was tough. 2015 and 2016, I was in some mild to moderate depression and an anxiety. I was medicated for it. Didn't have a good experience with a few medical professionals. So I stopped taking medication. And by the time 2017 rolled along, I don't know why or how, but the anxiety and depression seemed to just melt away. Emotions started coming back. I had highs and lows instead of just being numb to everything. So I, all of a sudden in the driveway of our house, I kind of turned to Katie and said, I'm going to dig into this church thing and go back and read these essays and figure this out. At that point, I wouldn't say I was secretive about things, but we didn't talk about specifics much. She knew I was reading things. She knew I was listening to podcasts, but I do remember, turning my phone screen off so she didn't see the Mormon Stories logo on the phone and little things like that. So I think it's probably a little mixture of 1 and 2. You don't quite expect the conclusion to come as quickly as it did, but it came pretty quickly of this just isn't adding up. And I'm leaving out, literally dozens of meetings in 2017 and the first half of 2018 with stake president and bishops and things like that. But yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah. So I guess the next way I'm going to ask my next question is, so this is Mormon Mental Health Podcast.
Right.
Why would I, a marriage and family therapist, be interested in bringing on a mixed faith couple on a Mormon mental health podcast? How does mixed faith marriaging affect mental health? Is that too broad of a question?
It affects everything, right? I think that it's fair to say that it affects your whole marriage, because the church is really good at laying out a plan in front of you, and those milestones you're going to hit. Exactly what your kids are going to be doing. And when you have a partner who changes the terms of agreement, so to speak, then now it's not really known that you're going to do something specifically. Is your kids are they going to get baptized? Are you both going to agree with that? Are you going to disagree with that? What type of lifestyle changes are going to happen in your partner's life that you may or may not agree with? That can cause a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression for both sides. But I think the unknown, just having a clear path, like I said, I'll call back. I said that I like to follow rules. I like to know what is laid out before me. So now not having a clear cut way was really scary to me. And, that absolutely caused just a lot of anxiety and worry within myself. At the beginning, I didn't feel like this was like my thing to tell anyone. And with any problem that you have, you try to work through it before you talk to people about it, because you're protecting yourself and your relationship by doing that. And so it was like very lonely for a long time, not really like knowing what to do. So in every facet, right, it affects your mental health and in your marriage, especially.
This may be more applicable to the extroverts than the introverts, but I found the thing that in a mixed faith marriage, especially towards the beginning, when you haven't figured out how to communicate, that brings up so much inner turmoil that I feel like I aged 10 years in 2017, because we hadn't figured out a good way to talk about everything yet. It still can happen, right? It's General Conference weekend. We watched both sessions today, listened to most of yesterday, and the session ends and you turn to each other and say, so what'd you think? And we're on different sides, not opposite ends of the spectrum, but we're not on the same side of the spectrum. So before figuring out the communication, that was where I felt the most anguish and mental health concerns of my own, was not being able to, especially while I'm in the rabbit hole, learning all these things of like, I can't talk to my best friend, this person that I love and trust. And when I do try that, it's visceral anger and sadness from her. And how are we going to do this? That absolutely is relevant to a mental health discussion.
Well, and so I'm going to break it down a little bit because I do think this is really important for people to understand, whether you're in a mixed faith marriage or whether you know people in your family system or in your friends, or maybe you're ecclesiastical leaders or auxiliary leaders supporting people in mixed faith marriage. But I'm going to talk really quickly kind of from a mental health model. You've got biopsychosocial. I don't know how many people have heard that, but if you've taken Psych 101, it's a fairly common way to think about it. So bio is your biology, and this is like your physical health, and also maybe genetic vulnerabilities or effects of medication you're on or substance abuse or anything like that. So anything that's affecting your biology. Psychological would be like your coping skills, self-esteem, how you think through things, whether or not you're a catastrophizer or whether or not you're kind of easygoing, so personality type stuff too. And then of course you've got social part of your life. You've got your peers, you've got your family circumstances, you've got relationships. And we know more than ever before in the field of psychology how important the social component is of mental health stability. So I just thought I would ask both of you to think about your own experiences, as well as now you've been able to hear. I know Marriage on a Tightrope has reached a lot of people. Plus you have a Facebook page, which, by the way, if you're in a mixed faith marriage, I highly recommend you joining that Facebook page, because so many people comment and ask questions and talk about their experiences. And you have the believing spouses and the non-believing spouses all sharing kind of their challenges or ideas or support. So I'd like for you to be thinking about yourselves, but also be thinking about the hundreds and hundreds of people that I know you've now interacted with, as far as what are some of the things that come up. So biologically, if we're just going to look biologically, what happens to people's bodies when they go through faith transition? What would you say about that?
Okay, so Alan ran to the bathroom, so I'll go ahead and
I'm back.
And
I was saying goodnight to my kids too.
Alan, she asked, biologically, what happens to your body when you go through a faith transition?
Yeah. So
Well, can't you tell you get sexier?
I love it. If you're a man, you grow some facial hairs.
That's true. Biologically, that is what you do. You grow a little facial hair.
You can grow here, but you're not growing so much here.
You lose it here.
So for Alan, it was hard to, like the lines were blended, right? Because he had lost his dad, and he was feeling like he hadn't really dealt with that, but then also, he had found things that he kind of just pushed down, so he didn't address them. And so physically, I can tell you, he went to the doctor multiple times because he was having heart palpitations. He wore like a monitor around him on his heart, just to like monitor to see if he had some sort of arrhythmia. And so, I mean, I can tell you, like, he physically, you had like a reaction, except I didn't know if it was due to the stress of his losing his dad, which could have been it also. But then the church part, I think it's two things.
Yeah. Well, one other aspect of it is, depends on where you land on the belief in God or afterlife side. But when there's you're not sure if you're going to have another life, the reaction you would hope that you take is, I better take better care of my body. And so your behaviors change to take better care of your body. I think that happened for a while. I'm not in the best of shape right now.
We're a little bit quarantined right now.
We've got quarantine bodies. I've got dad bod and quarantine bod. Oh, I made cinnamon rolls today. Yeah. One pan for the family, one pan for me. But so yeah, Katie did mention some of the physical things that happen because of the stress of all of this, and that certainly is part of it. But once you're past it, that's where I think where the behaviors start to change, both in things that you didn't used to do that now you do. I posted today on Facebook a picture of the cinnamon rolls next to my cup of coffee. I'm like, am I doing general conference right between these two things? So some of your behaviors change in that way. But then also if this is the only life you've got, then that's going to change as well.
How about you, Katie? Any things you think about how your body reacted, or even, like I said, people that you hear from as far as things that they report?
Yeah, I think stress eating is a big one, especially if it's something that you can't verbally process, right? Like you're not talking to anyone, you're not telling anyone. And so for me, like food is definitely comforting. I mean, I've used that my whole life. And I know that so many other people, there are other people though who go like hyper active, like they become obsessed with working out. And I think it's a good way, it's a really good coping mechanism, because they can like just burn off some of that steam, which I was in and out of that. I would go down and then come up out of it and then go down. But I think those are the two most common ones, is eating or just really hyperactivity.
Yeah.
I mean, I think like we all have our own coping mechanisms, right? And so people just find whatever that they lean to.
Yeah. Yeah. And things that I would probably add are just, like again, anxiety symptoms, rapid heart rate, worry, rumination, staying up at night, not being able to turn off your brain, insomnia, both increase of appetite, decrease of appetite. It can, of course, bring nightmares, or just, it's just so many different things that our bodies respond to these kinds of stressors. And especially from high demand religions, sometimes people I don't know understand that a shift in beliefs can really be quite difficult for either people who are going through it themselves, like Allan, or those who are in their supportive circles, Katie, because like you're saying, that shifts so many things about how you've thought through your life, how you think you're going to raise your kids, how you think your home environment is going to be, how you think you're going to teach your kids about certain things, all of that. So yeah, that's biologically, I think it definitely has an effect. What would you say psychologically? So as far as just what kinds of emotions you noticed, or what kinds of just feelings or coping things, just from like a psychological perspective, and either again, like yourselves or people that you hear from, what kinds of things do you notice?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the first few that come to mind, if this fits what you just expressed, is I find myself questioning everything that's told to me now. So I think more of a natural skepticism is how I would put it. Katie may put it more as cynicism, or lack, like I don't know that it's not trustworthy, but I think there's a thirst for learning now and understanding things and not taking them as they're presented to me. Is one of the ways that I personally have been affected by this.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that just my personality has shifted, and mostly for the better, where previously I talked about how learning how to communicate had, for an extrovert, been very difficult for me when I couldn't communicate some of the things to Katie. But I've more now that we've found ways to talk about certain things, I've also found myself being able to not compulsively just blurt out what I'm thinking in both our marriage, but in social situations and professional situations. I've learned measured communication better because of this than I previously did, where that urge just to say something is easier for me to not push down in a bad respect, but easier for me to push aside and let the moment be what it is, or be a better listener in that moment. Those are some of the things that come to mind initially.
Some big things that I see is just avoidance. A lot of people just avoid it. They avoid getting into it. They avoid talking about hard topics. And I mean, I absolutely did. I did anything and everything I could to stay busy so that I didn't have to think about it, because if I thought about it, I would feel so much grief and anger and pain. I would go through those stages of grief over and over again. So in order to just sort of numb that, I kept myself so incredibly busy. And that led to like a mini breakdown for myself, but I found ways to cope. I would go on trips. I would take my kids to Disney. I was the primary president. I was the PTA president. I had my hand in everything just so that I could avoid.
Keep yourself busy.
Yeah. Avoid like getting into any conflict head on. And I think that a lot of our couples are in that, when we talk about, how do you deal with this or that? Well, we just avoid it. We don't talk about it. We ignore it, which I think leads to, bigger problems. But in the beginning, sometimes that's what you feel like you have to do in order just to make it through, this one thing. And so we found ourselves doing that a lot in the beginning. We've become, like Allan said, better communicators, so we can face it head on now. But those are absolutely some things that so many deal with.
Yeah.
Whether it's, I was. I mean, Katie, you reminded me of something. I think one of the very common things that we've seen is, especially those that have left. Katie, let me say it this way. Katie just talked about avoiding hard conversations or difficult topics and conversations. That manifests itself differently for the person that has stepped away from the faith, where I'm going to live the way that I want to live. I'm going to drink alcohol. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to go to R-rated movies. I'm going to do all these things. But I don't want to feel the ire of my wife. So I'm just not going to tell her. So sometimes honesty becomes more of a question, just from a behavioral point of view. And that's one of the pieces of advice we always say is, I just a couple of weeks ago, I had someone tell me, if my wife knew I had one drink, she would leave. I've had hundreds and she doesn't know. And I'm like, dude, you're willing to risk all of that for this drink? And let's talk about this. And what does that conversation look like? And we've kind of started to have that conversation. But that's one thing that I've noticed is the behaviors or secrecy can very easily creep in.
Yeah, and so I'm going to put a pin on some of that because I'd like to talk about that from the social perspective. So just kind of piggybacking on some of the psychological things that you've mentioned, I would say, I think in my practice, I see a lot of anger, a lot of grief cycle stuff. I see a lot of sadness, see a lot of confusion. I agree with the avoidance and
Right.
Also the conflict, right? Which of course then can bring it on its own. I do think that we see exacerbated symptoms of depression and anxiety for a lot of people who maybe have never had those kinds of diagnoses before and now do because of the faith transition, and or they had those types of leanings or maybe have struggled with anxiety or depression before, but now it's exacerbated because of this topic. So those are all very normal kind of like psychological type stuff. And again, black and white thinking can get in the way, catastrophizing can get in the way. The stories we tell about these things can be very detrimental sometimes. And the whole thing can just be very overwhelming for so many people. So let's go to the social circle of this, which kind of goes into some of the things that you're mentioning with couple dynamics, conflict styles, how couples, maybe some of the challenges that they start finding as they're trying to negotiate or talk about certain things. So yeah, what kind of social issues did you have come up for you, or do you see regularly come up?
I think the three most common email topics that we get are, of course, first, how do we figure this out with our marriage? How do we communicate better? How do we get past some of these problems, these milestones of baptisms and things like that? The second, and probably maybe even more common, is
lifestyle changes.
Well, children.
Oh yeah, children.
What do we do about the kids?
Yeah.
And third would be, how do we talk to our families about this? Mm-hmm. So those would, as far as social, those would be like the categories of social that we are asked the most about. As far as social is with the couple, some things happen when a faith transition occurs, especially if you're both active and ingrained socially into your ward. With me is pretty common, I think, and not to minimize the experience for anybody that has gone through it, because it's devastating. But being that very charismatic or extroverted, I'll say, person in a ward. I love everybody. I love to talk. The church, while some moments may be boring, even when you believe, it was a very social thing for me. And so all of a sudden, raising my hand and saying certain things eventually and quickly alienates you. And all of a sudden, you're not in that social circle anymore. Your spouse still is in that social circle. And, people that you're going to dinner, or people that she's having lunches with and dinners with and meetings with, are people that have said some hurtful things in certain meetings with me. And I'm like, what are you doing? And this is hard. And can we find a new circle, please? And no, this is my community. So that's one thing that is difficult socially. At the risk of rambling on, do you have another social issue you can talk about?
I mean, I think just lifestyle changes were big, were really difficult for me. Garments was a big one.
That was the big mistake that I made, was not communicating that I didn't want to wear my garments anymore. I just stopped. And I think that's the only behavioral change that I did. As far as how high the stakes are, that's probably a lower stakes mistake compared to some of the things that you could start doing without communicating. So if you're going to make a mistake,
I think you'd be surprised.
I know.
Yeah,
I'm not trying
depends.
to say that wasn't difficult. I think that there could have been other things that I could have kept secrets that would have been a bigger deal, but that was a hard one.
Well, but at the time it was devastating. It was very difficult to deal with, right? So, anytime there's change, last year, exactly, like on Easter, we were at church and I turned to Allan during the first hymn and I said, it just occurred to me that he might not believe that Christ was divine. And I said to him, oh, do you believe that Christ was he resurrected? And it was just like the funniest thing that I asked him during the first opening song of the Easter sacrament. So, and we both started laughing but it's little things like that come up that you can't prepare yourself for, because they'll happen when they happen. It happens in a natural way, right? So it's just the little things that come up, either on a daily or monthly or yearly basis or whatever, that you're dealing with constantly, that can become overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in this kind of social part of this model, I mean, there's so much. There's the marriage, of course, which is your primary relationship. There's parenting dynamics.
Yeah.
There's friends and ward situations, like with leaders and how you're going to negotiate in your community. And then, of course, there's in-laws and family and, all the siblings and all of that stuff. So that's a lot of social. And plus, in Mormonism, we tend to be fairly family-centric and tribal, so there's a lot of family focus, and it's difficult. We're not the kind of culture that's like, oh, mind your own business. No, we're all up in each other's business. That's kind of who we are as a people. So it could be really hard. And I think, even as you're talking about the example of the gentleman who was drinking alcohol in secret from his wife, I don't know a lot of times that that's so much about alcohol as it is where these kind of developmental processes are diametrically opposed. I think a faith transition sometimes taps into this individual process, right? This individual growth, this individual development that's more about, what do I need? What do I want? What do I think? What do I believe? Whereas the relationship, the marriage, is more in a we space, right? What do we need? What do we want? How are we going to go forward in life? And so then you have these kind of tensions that are both very legitimate, all of a sudden in a very different space than ever before in that marriage. And that can be very difficult to negotiate. So yeah, it's just some of the things that you're doing individually rub up like sandpaper to some of the things that you need to feel comfortable and safe as a couple. And that's tough. I mean, it's really tough. So I think what I'm getting at here tonight is that faith transitions are hard. Mixed faith marriages are hard. There's so many things that come up for couples, and I've been working in faith transition for probably about almost 15 years, and fairly with it coming through my practice. I've been in practice for about almost 25 years. And then the two of you have gone through this personally, and you've also, started this kind of online support group through your own kind of, just sharing your story. And then of course, other people share their stories with you, etc. So we have decided to join forces.
Yay!
You guys reached out to me a few months ago, or even maybe it was even last year, but when we started talking about this idea of, could we as a team come up with some resources? I think, Katie, you started out the whole podcast by saying you were asking for resources from your ecclesiastical leader, like, help me out. I need to know what other couples are doing. I need to know how to get through this time. I need to know how to communicate with my husband. I need to know what kinds of things to ask or talk about or negotiate. And there wasn't a lot of things forthcoming. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about what you're hoping to create and what we're going to start here in a few weeks together?
Yeah, I'll start. So we approached Natasha, and she was like our A-list celebrity that we wanted to, we really wanted to come on, to bring on with us. But as all of you know, she is so knowledgeable, she is so delightful, and she is so helpful to so many people. And so it was kind of like our top pick, and you said yes. What we really wanted to create was a course for those who are trying to navigate their mixed faith marriage. And this course, it hopefully will help so many couples to learn what a faith crisis is. There's so many people on, at the spectrum that are in different places in their marriage. So starting from the beginning, we talk about what is a faith crisis. And then some of the topics we talk about is, how do we negotiate those? You call them tenders. I like that. How do you negotiate those things that are really tender to talk about and to think about? How do you parent in a mixed faith marriage? All these things. And we came up with a 6-week program, and it's a webinar. And man, I don't know, I'm not going to call us prophets or anything, but that was probably the smartest thing we did because of quarantine. Everyone's at home. Everyone can join in on the webinar. And so we have this program where we meet a couple nights a week to talk about the material and answer any questions. And Natasha provides the really important part, which is like the clinical, knowledgeable, tried and true and tested part. And we just provide, I think, the practical part. What have we done in our own marriage? What have we talked about with other couples? We've been doing this for a couple of years. So we have some good insight into that. And we are just super excited.
I think the biggest reason why we landed on an online course is so many of the couples that we talk to, and again, hundreds of couples that we've talked to, and almost hundreds of couples we've had dinner with and met personally and text. So many of them are not ready for a one-on-one therapist session, whether that means they haven't quite gotten there as a couple or they can't afford it, but they desperately need help. The idea of the online course was kind of a bridge between, we've found the podcast helpful because it's given us an opportunity to talk about the topic of that specific episode, and the other side of the bridge being we have time and good headspace and money to talk to a therapist one-on-one. We wanted to create that bridge. So doing a group setting online course was the bridge that we really felt like we could help create, but only with the help of a professional clinical perspective like Natasha.
Yeah, so we have it up and live. We start on Monday, April 13th, and it goes through May 29th. And you can go to Eventbrite. We jokingly came up with the name Workshop on a Tightrope, but I think it works well for what we're trying to do. And you can go to online classes and look for Workshop on a Tightrope, and you can sign up that way.
The structure of the class will be like this. You know what to expect. On Monday nights, we're going to have the course material for that week. It typically 60 to 90 minutes, and that's going to be a Zoom meeting similar to what we're recording now. It won't be streamed, of course, like this one is being, but it will be an opportunity for you can be completely anonymous in that group if you would like as well, but a time to get that course material directly from Natasha and us, ask questions at the end of that, communicate with us and have some of that one-on-one time, or 20, 40, 60 on one time, or on 3 time with us. And then on Wednesday, after you've had a chance to talk about some of that course material,
we give you an assignment.
We give you an assignment to work on up until Sunday that will be related to the course material that was presented on Monday. And then on Sunday, we're going to have a Q&A with the 3 of us as well, to bring any questions, any success stories, any challenges that you had during the week with that course material and an assignment, so that we can talk about some of those things and celebrate the wins and talk about the challenges. And then on Monday, the next day, we're going to start it all over again with the next week of material, and we will do that for the 6-week course.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this. And here's what I'll say, having worked with so many couples in this arena, I do think that there is an educational component to this, that if you can get that through a class, even if you do decide you need marital counseling as well, it saves you a lot of, quite frankly, time and money, that you don't have to necessarily get some basic information that then once you have that, if you do marital counseling, you're like way ahead of the game, if that makes sense. So, because a lot of times I feel like I'm just spending first sessions, just, like first 3 to 4 sessions, sometimes just explaining basic things that I don't necessarily, think that they need to pay me just for education per se. So I think that's one thing that can be very helpful. I also think that, to your point, some people maybe can't necessarily afford the therapy piece. So this is really a lot of, hours of one-on-one with me, which I'm kind of, I don't know, I feel funny sometimes tooting my own horn, but I'm a known expert in this area.
You are.
You are absolutely.
You toot that horn, girl, and we will toot it with you.
Yes.
There are non-Mormon therapists who actually seek me out and pay me consultation fees so that they can figure out how to work with Mormons. And I've presented with, many national conferences where I teach other therapists and things how to work with couples around some of these issues. Plus, the other thing is that there aren't a lot of us. There are. I'm not the only one. I'm not like, the only person who knows how to do this work well. And of course, we can always refer you to people that we know in the community that can do this work well. But there's many, many therapists who do not know how to do mixed marriage work well. Yeah. And especially in kind of our community, and that are culturally competent in Mormonism in particular. And this is such a tender area, because you cannot have the number one thing that cannot happen in a mixed faith relationship with a therapist is feeling like one person is being sided with.
And so stole the words out of my mouth.
Right from the get-go, that's hard, because if you go see an LDS therapist, then, one person might feel like, oh, I don't know. If you go see the non-LDS therapist, another person may feel like, oh, I don't know. So right off the bat, we want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable. I would say it's equal opportunity challenging time. Right. And it's equal opportunity support, right? And I just think that's incredibly important, and I pride my work in that. So I think that's something that
Natasha
can offer.
That is why we reached out to you to do this, because 9 out of 10 of the emails, and this is me pulling a stat out of my head, but honestly, 9 out of 10 of the emails that mention we've gone to a therapist, the next sentence 9 out of 10 times is, but we stopped going because it was clear that they took the side of this spouse. Mm-hmm. Whether it was the believing side or the non. Usually it's an LDS therapist that took the side of the believing spouse, and there was just too much baggage there, whether that was perceived or in reality. So we've heard how you speak, and you're not biased towards either side of belief. We love your clinical approach to things. And so I agree with you. There are other people that take this same approach, and we just have come to love and trust you. And so we're very excited to do it.
Well, thank you. And I want to say right up front that our agenda, as I hope you would know, and of course with Kattie and Allan both being involved in this as well, that our agenda has zero to do with, having people either leave or stay, within their membership of the church. It's a very personal decision, and we'll support people. There's very good reasons why people find church attendance and membership and belief extremely sacred and important. And there's also very valid reasons why people find it harmful or not relevant or things of that nature. So we will support that. Our agenda is relationships. We want you to thrive in your relationships. And not that our approach is that every marriage should stay married. That's not our approach either. People separate or divorce or decide different routes for lots of different reasons. Mm-hmm. However, we would never want this to be the primary reason. Mm-hmm. If sometimes people faith transitions, it's kind of like the 10th problem out of many, many problems. And so it kind of makes sense that they're not going to stay together. But for a lot of people, if this is kind of your first major problem, we definitely don't want it to be a reason. It shouldn't have to be a reason why you feel like your marriage isn't threatened. And even if you are going to shift in a direction that maybe won't keep you married, most people have children and they still need to co-parent, and they still need to figure out how to have a mixed faith family, whether they stay married or not. So those are all things that we're going to be addressing in this class, because we want your family to thrive. We want your family to do well. We want your kids to respect both parents, and for both of you to have good strategies. So the other thing I want to say is that in all of this, I have convinced Kattie to become...
Oh, that's right.
I have convinced Kattie to become a wellness life coach, because I think that she does tremendous work. She knows this area so well. And so she is joining my online practice called Symmetry Solutions as a life coach, where she will be available to help people in mixed faith marriages. And I am thrilled. So Kattie, I'm so glad that you're going to be joining our team.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm excited for this new challenge. I think it'll be great. I think we've been in this space for a couple of years now. So definitely gained a lot of perspective and wisdom, and love that I get to work with you and be like tutored by you. So it's excellent all the way around.
This is the corniest corny I could ever say. And I think I've said it to you, Natasha, when you initially asked her to do this. I am so proud of Kattie, and seeing her help people in this space and be that ear has been incredible for me. To see her, this is the most cliche way of putting it, but I can't think of anything else. To see how she spreads her wings with people in this space, just... She can watch all the movies on Sunday for all I care. I'll approve of it. In fact, I think that's what we're going to do right after this. But I just think you're the bee's knees, huh?
Oh,
the bee's knees.
Good supportive husband.
Awesome. Well, we're going to make sure that the threads and the podcast website and all that have all the links to the both Eventbrite workshops that you can go and register. There's a week left to join us. So we'd love to have you. Make sure you let people know about it if you know somebody who might benefit from it. And then also I will make sure and put a link to Symmetry Solutions. So if anybody wants to, start working with Kattie individually, you can know how to contact her in that regard. We're still getting her up on the website and stuff, but if you call the number, they can start figuring that out with you. And so why don't we end with, we talked a lot about faith transitions from the standpoint of what ends up happening through the process. It can be difficult. We're saying, okay, here's this resource that we're going to offer, but why don't you guys end by saying a little bit about some of the positives now that you've been through this for a while? Like, what have you learned? What have you been, quote unquote, blessed by, like Kattie said at the beginning? And, where on the other end of the tunnel and the light, what are some things that people can look forward to, even though it can seem like a really hard time?
Sure.
Yeah, I'll go. Well, just some of the things off the top of my head. I feel like, when you work through hard, difficult things and you have big, hard, fierce conversations, your communication gets better with each other. You grow. We've grown a lot closer to each other. I think I feel a lot more love, a lot more empathy for him and where he's at, and he does for me as well. I think that's a big thing. Another thing is we have given the gift to our kids of letting them make decisions. I think we always want them to make their own decisions, but one thing Allan and I do is, sometimes we don't agree on everything. And I think that's in life, you don't agree with people, but we come to kind of a conclusion of where we're at. And then we would present it to the kids and say, I believe this way and Dad believes this way. And then you can form your own opinion. And how do you feel about it? And I think it teaches them how to still love and have concern and respect for someone else that doesn't think the same way as you. And that's something we've learned and something that we're now teaching our kids. So that's a really positive thing.
Yeah, you stole two of mine, darn it. But I don't want to end on this one, so I'll say this one first. But with emotional intimacy, which certainly comes as a result of these fierce conversations, you work through a difficult topic, you feel like you've conquered a relationship mountain. And with that emotional intimacy comes better physical intimacy. We absolutely have a much, not that it was unhealthy, but we have a healthier and more thrivant physical relationship as well, which is, I'm not complaining. And then the other thing I was going to mention is it has taught us to not sweat the small stuff and to focus on what is most important. Today, after conference, we had a fierce conversation about tithing and how tithing is used and how one of us may not appreciate how tithing is used. And some things came out that I had never heard Katie say before. And I said, I haven't paid tithing on what I've earned since July 2017. I've never heard you share that opinion before. And there was kind of this tense silence, as there often is. And then I got up and walked over to her, and we both communicated, touching noses. We both communicated, I still love you. It doesn't matter that we feel differently on this issue. It doesn't change how I feel about you. I'm still with you. I love you. And kiss, tickle, tickle. Being able to do that is a huge gift. Be able to say, okay, we just had a fight, but that's all right. Moving on to the next thing.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all of your stories and your vulnerability. It's through each other, I think, that we learn and feel supported. And I hope any of you who are out there who are trying to navigate these, what can seem very stormy waters, that you'll know that, oceans are spaces that we will want to help you navigate, and that they don't have to be super scary. They can be calm and beautiful and serene as well. So please reach out to us if you have any questions. Please support Mormon Mental Health Podcast if you can, either by throwing it a few dollars and or sharing its content with other listeners and letting other people know about this as a resource. Please go and like Marriage on a Tightrope Facebook page and start listening to those podcasts because they're phenomenal. And register for our class if you think that's going to be helpful. We'd love to have you join us. And just reach out if there's any other questions that we can help you with. Thank you so much, Allan and Katie, for your time tonight.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Natasha.
All right. You guys have a good night. We'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Toodaloo.
Thanks for joining us today on Mormon Mental Health Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please help us and become a monthly subscriber at mormonmentalhealth.org. The goals of this podcast include education, advocacy, and the mental health and general well-being of Mormons and their families. We can't further this work without your support. Music for this episode was provided by the Lower Lights.
Over life's tempestuous sea, chart and compass came from thee, Jesus Savior, pilot me hiding rock and treacherous shore, chart and compass came from me. Jesus, Savior, pilot me.
As a mother stills her child, thou canst hush the ocean wild, wondrous sovereign of the sea. Jesus, Savior, pilot me.
Boisterous wave,
Boisterous wave,
obey thy will.
obey thy will.
When thou sayest
sayest
to them,
Be still.
wondrous sovereign of the sea. Jesus, Savior, pilot me. When at last I near the shore, and the fearful breakers roar, may I hear thee say to me, fear not, I will pilot thee. Twixt me and
Twixt me and
the peaceful rest,
the peaceful rest.
then while